Good afternoon. As we wait for people to connect, I want to thank you for joining us for this timely discussion on the fifth anniversary of the Abraham Accords and recent developments in the Israel-Hamas war. As you, and we'll also hear firsthand insights about our recent congressional delegation visits to Israel, offering an on-the-ground perspective on the challenges and opportunities facing the region today. I'm Brian Romick, and I'm honored to have stepped into the role of President and CEO of Democratic Majority for Israel this past spring. I'm grateful that we've convened distinguished speakers to share their insights on these agreements and the challenges ahead. Before I introduce them, a reminder to please consider following us on social media. We're on X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky. You can sign up for our news and updates on our website, dmfi.org. If you want to ask a question, submit it through the Q&A feature on your Zoom interface. If you're watching on Facebook, you can enter it in the comments section. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our distinguished speakers for today. First up is Ambassador Daniel Shapiro. He's currently a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council. He was the U.S. Ambassador to Israel in the Obama administration, and he was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East in the Biden administration. Dan also served as the first U.S. State Department Senior Advisor for Regional Integration in the Bureau of Near East Affairs, where he was tasked with advancing a more interconnected Middle East and expanding the Abraham Accords. Dan also held several senior policy positions in the State Department, at the National Security Council, and in Congress. He was the Senior Director for Middle East and North Africa on the National Security Council from 2009 to 2011 and was the Director of Legislative Affairs of the National Security Council from 1999 to 2001. Next up is Congressman Josh Gottheimer. He represents New Jersey's 5th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives, and he co-founded the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. A leading pro-Israel voice in Congress, he has championed measures to strengthen the U.S.-Israel security cooperation, ensure robust defense assistance, and counter threats from Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas. He has also been a national leader in the fight against anti-Semitism, pressing universities and tech companies to address anti-Semitic speech and violence, and advance legislation to protect Jewish communities at home and abroad. Congressman Gottheimer serves on the House Financial Services Committee and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. He just returned from co-leading a bipartisan congressional delegation to Israel, where he visited humanitarian aid sites, met with Israeli leaders, including the Prime Minister, and assessed both security and humanitarian developments in the region. Ambassador, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks to everybody for joining today's webinar. It's good to be with DMFI as always, and particularly on this occasion when we're talking about the 5th anniversary of the Abraham Accords and everything that's going on around that. Not all of it good, but it's important that we take stock of the achievements of these 5 years, the current status of the war, and hopefully the way forward. I'm actually participating in this webinar from Israel. I've spent a little time here this month taking stock of the situation, meeting with Israeli leaders of all different parts of the Israeli political spectrum, lots of friends, lots of folks in the military and security establishment, and importantly with the hostage families and those who are supporting the hostage families. I've been to Hostage Square, Tel Aviv, as I'm sure many of you have. Tonight, as we speak, there are families of the hostages who are camped out in front of the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem, very concerned about the latest turn of events, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But it remains, in my judgment, the highest priority, or should be the highest priority of U.S. policy. There are still, of course, 2 U.S. citizen hostages deceased and their families waiting for them to be returned, and of course 48 total hostages, about 20 of them alive. And so as we have this discussion, I don't want to lose sight of what for me should be the top priority for U.S. policy, and I think for everybody, which is to how to get the hostages home to their families. I actually testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about a month ago, and Senator Dave McCormick of Pennsylvania and Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada were the chair and ranking of the subcommittee on the Middle East, and they really wanted to develop the ideas of the diplomatic opportunities that we actually face in this period in the Middle East, despite the difficulties, but in part because of everything that's happened over the last almost 2 years of the war since the terrible October 7th attacks. And what I tried to emphasize during that discussion was that the very significant military achievements that Israel has had against Iran and the axis of Iranian-sponsored extremist groups, obviously starting with Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, and of course, U.S. military achievements dealing with those actors and helping defend Israel from them, really have set the stage for political achievements, which ultimately, as anybody who's read their Clausewitz knows, is what war is about. It's politics by other means. In this case, it was a war thrust upon Israel by the October 7th attacks and the participation thereafter by numerous other members of that axis, first Hezbollah, later the Houthis, later Iran itself. But the goal is to secure meaningful and lasting political achievements for the good, for security, for prosperity, for a better Middle East, and for a strengthened coalition of moderate states, Israel, Arab states, all of them U.S. partners, and a weakened coalition of Iran and its axis of terrorist organizations. That axis in Iran actually is weaker than it has ever been because of those military achievements. We can take a number of steps to continue to weaken it. But one of the ways we do that is by getting back on the path of political achievement. Now, of course, everybody understands the achievements of the Abraham Accord signed in 2020 during the first Trump administration, immediately endorsed by then candidate Biden, and then maybe the only thing that had real bipartisan support during that campaign between Israel, the UAE, Morocco, and Bahrain. And then the effort to carry that forward during the Biden administration. I had a big part of that. I had joined the administration in 2023, as Brian mentioned, as the senior advisor on Middle East regional integration. One of my first projects was to continue to build out the Negev Forum. You recall the Negev Forum was the Negev Summit in March of 22, and Secretary Blinken traveled to Israel, and he and Foreign Minister Lapid met with 4 Arab foreign ministers, and a standing forum of those 6 countries and working groups on a whole range of issues was stood up, and we were in the process of planning a much expanded version of that Negev Forum on October 19th, 2023 in Marrakesh. It would have been quite an important gathering with those 6 countries and more, Jordan, Palestinian, several other Arab and Muslim countries likely to participate. Obviously, it didn't take place after the October 7th attacks, but getting back on that path of the United States serving as a convener together with Israel and the countries that have already normalized relations with it, and those that still see the opportunity that can come from normalization or otherwise integrating their relations with Israel, is exactly where we want to steer to coming out of this war. There are numerous gains. We've talked about them on many occasions in defense. Actually, one of the things I discovered during my year at the Pentagon of 2024 was that even when other aspects of regional integration had really paused because of the war, regional integration in the security sector was actually galloping forward as more and more Arab states were putting themselves into the coalition to help Israel and help the United States address these common threats, including when Israel was attacked by Iran on April 13th and later again in October. So there's an opportunity coming out of this to reconvene forums like the Negev Forum, to have Israel and the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco invite additional countries to join into the Abraham Accords in some formal or informal fashion, to continue to develop those projects for economic cooperation, for tourism, for health, for water cooperation, for agriculture, energy cooperation, to continue to build out those common defense structures, such as an integrated air and missile defense, something we really took major steps forward for in 2024. And of course, to actualize the very, very promising announcement that was made in September of 2023 at the G20, just before the war began, which was the IMEC, the India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor, to bring shipping and goods and energy and communications by a transit corridor between India, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, Israel, and on to destinations in Europe, something that has tremendous opportunities for all those countries and, of course, for strengthening that coalition of regional partners. That's the goal. That's where President Trump says he wants to lead. He has spoken, of course, very openly about his desire to expand the Abraham Accords, to see Saudi Arabia take its place in that with its own normalization agreement, something that the Biden administration that I served in worked very hard on, even during the war. In fact, before the war, but also during, even May, as late as May of 2024, we had all but finished the bilateral U.S.-Saudi agreements, security and economic and energy agreements that could have undergirded a normalization agreement with Israel had it taken that step forward. And so President Trump wants to do that. I'm convinced there would be very strong bipartisan support if we can get back on that path. The challenge, of course, is that none of these, and this I said to the subcommittee when I testified, is that none of these very promising opportunities can really be advanced before the end of the war. The war has to end. Hostages need to be returned home, all of them, those living and those deceased. Hamas must be removed from power by a combination of military pressure and the political support of Arab states who have declared it in their interest and that their policy is that Gaza cannot be governed by Hamas going forward. That they have fully condemned the attacks of October 7th in recent statements and said that it is their policy and their goal to see Hamas removed from power. Now, can't be just words. There has to be a process by which the war ends, those hostages are released, and that transition in Gaza takes place. That can only be led by a U.S. diplomatic initiative. And that I think I have to say I feel is lacking at the moment. There are Arab states, Egypt, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, which is a more complicated case, but still part of this group. Jordan, of course, who have declared that they want to be partners to bring stability, to bring reconstruction to Gaza after the war, to bring de-radicalization, so that so that Hamas does not have a base of support among very extreme elements of the Gaza population. And so that there and even to provide Arab security forces after a ceasefire that together with U.S. security forces, again, something we worked on to construct a plan for together with CENTCOM during the Biden administration, so that there would be Arab and Israeli cooperation to ensure security with Gaza. But what they ask for is some, of course, guarantee that the war will end, even if Israel has the ability to continue to conduct counterterrorism operations to ensure that its population is protected, just as it does in Lebanon under the ceasefire, under the terms of the ceasefire and the understandings with the United States that were achieved last November. And also, of course, they want to know what the future holds, whether this is a pathway towards some kind of pathway to a Palestinian state, as they call it. Now, of course, I'm sitting here in Israel. I know very well that most Israelis, even those who have long in the past been supporters of a two-state solution, are not interested or able to have that conversation about a Palestinian state right now, and that's totally understandable. It would certainly be long in the future and require significant change and reform of Palestinian leadership, and it would look a lot different from previous attempts to do this. But that part of that discussion is something the Arab states are looking for. And what I don't see, I have to say, is a concerted, consistent U.S.-led diplomatic effort that's first and foremost focused on getting the hostages released. There's been a lot of back and forth proposals made and then withdrawn and then changed from a 60-day 10 hostage proposal to an all for all proposal and then back again. The president, meanwhile, sounding almost fatalistic about the state of even the hostages who we believe are still alive. And so a lot of concern expressed to me by hostage families that consistency is lacking. And then a number of other mistakes, if I could be so bold. President Trump earlier in the year, or during Prime Minister Netanyahu's first visit, speaking about a Gaza Riviera, basically the departure of all Palestinians from Gaza and replacing it with a hotel strip on the beach. This is not going to happen. It's been a distraction. It's emboldened very extreme voices in the Israeli cabinet to pursue some form of expelling or making Palestinians leave Gaza. That was a mistake. Together with President Biden during the transition, President Trump deserves credit for this. Worked on that hostage deal that was in place as of January 18th, but then didn't object to the passing on going into phase 2 of that hostage deal in March. Apparently, President Trump didn't object to a pause in the import of humanitarian aid into Gaza between March and May, which was a big mistake. It led to a hunger crisis. I think it's somewhat being addressed now, but that was a huge mistake, and it led to huge pressure on Israel, no pressure on Hamas whatsoever. Then President Trump cooperated with Israel on the strikes against the Iranian nuclear facilities. I supported that, felt that was the right decision with a very good result in significantly delaying the Iranian nuclear program. And it created a window of opportunity for a development with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who then visited Washington, of a narrative of an off ramp of a victory, of a narrative of a victory that could end that war, get the hostages home. There was no follow up on that, and that's time passed and slipped away. Now we have Israel going into a Gaza City operation, which the IDF is very concerned. They've said this very clearly to their political leadership. Could cost hostages' lives, many soldiers' lives, obviously more civilian casualties. And there was no objection by President Trump to that. And then, of course, we've just all learned that this strike in Doha last week, also President Trump had prior knowledge of, didn't object, and it has really somewhat backfired. By the way, the people that strike was intended to target, the Hamas leaders who have been resident in Doha, they are legitimate targets, and I think everybody knows Israel will eliminate them at some stage, and that is appropriate. But the when and the how and the where matter. And it now appears that effort that President Trump seemed to have given a green light to has somewhat backfired. Certainly has stalled negotiations to get hostages released. So we're all facing these concerns that the upcoming operations could lead to a deeper involvement of Israel in an almost occupation scenario in Gaza, which very few Israelis want. Extend the war by many months, cost the lives of hostages and soldiers, lead to more isolation of Israel. We're seeing that in this run up to the UN General Assembly and these calls by various countries to recognize a Palestinian state. It's not going to help. It's not going to do anything to recognize a Palestinian state, but it's a sign of Israel's isolation, which even Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke to yesterday, saying, Israel may be moving into a phase where it has to act like Sparta, essentially a fully self-sufficient economic and security, which is not the vision. The vision is Israel as a fully welcomed member of the region and of the international community with support from the United States in making that happen. The biggest fear, of course, on this anniversary is that missteps in this regard could actually endanger the Abraham Accords and endanger the possibility of Saudi normalization. And an overreaction by Israel to these recognition announcements, such as announcing annexation in the West Bank, could further harm that. And the UAE signaled that would be a bit of a red line for them. They didn't say exactly what they would do, but they would have to react in some way if there were announcements of annexation. Here again, the Trump administration has been very, very unclear what its policy is, and not counseling Israel not to take a step that could actually take us backwards on the path that we want to go on toward building that regional community. So again, the opportunities are actually immense. And the last part of my comments, I don't want to pour too much negativity or cold water on them. I believe very strongly that at the strategic level and over a medium-term horizon, we have an excellent chance, especially because of the military gains of the last 2 years against the Iranian axis, to strengthen the Abraham Accords, bring new countries into them, move towards normalization with other countries, and deepen regional integration. And that's very much what the goal should be. But it will take very strong U.S. diplomatic leadership which I'm not sure we currently have. It will take a clear and near-term effort to bring the war to an end, to get all those hostages home to their families, to ensure Hamas is fully removed from power in Gaza. And that's what I hope we will see in the weeks and then of course in the months and years ahead.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Shapiro. Congressman Gottheimer will be joining us in just another minute or two. He's got held up at a committee hearing. But in the meantime, you alluded to this some, but I'd like to have you expound upon it a little bit more. As you mentioned, Israel launched a ground offensive in Gaza City today, which it says is necessary for it to defeat Hamas. And clearly, some pro-Israel Democrats like yourself have some questions and concerns. Could you talk a little bit more about kind of the implications and the concerns you have surrounding this ground incursion?
Sure, I'll be brief because I see that Congressman Gottheimer has joined us. I talk very regularly with friends and colleagues who I worked with while I was serving in the Pentagon, in the IDF, in the Israeli Ministry of Defense, and other parts of the Israeli defense establishment, current and retired. And they have been nearly universal in expressing their concern. And this has all been public. The Chief of Staff of the IDF has made very clear his views to the cabinet. That the operation, as it was authorized and directed, of course, the IDF is obligated to carry out the cabinet's decision, runs the risk of the costing lives of hostages, runs the risk of costing the lives of many Israeli soldiers, and runs the risk of pulling Israel into kind of a semi-permanent occupation of a significant part of Gaza with no one to hand it off to. Again, there's really nobody, very, very small numbers of Israelis who want to see that kind of an occupation result. As a result, what is interesting is that the IDF is proceeding very, very deliberately. I mean, quite slowly. Obviously, there are strikes, and we've seen pictures of that. And of course, they've given direction to the Palestinian population in Gaza City to evacuate to the south. Some have quite a number, tens or even a few 100,000, but hundreds of thousands remain. Either they won't leave or they can't leave, and that creates a huge challenge for the IDF to try to conduct this operation in a way that doesn't produce significant more civilian casualties, that doesn't endanger hostages' lives, and of course their own soldiers' lives. So in order to try to minimize that, the IDF is proceeding at a very, very deliberate pace. And I think one of the reasons they are doing that is to try to give time for a negotiation to resume and that off-ramp of a hostage and ceasefire deal to take place. They do not want, they've said this to the cabinet, to end up having to run that part of Gaza with a military government. They do not want to have that responsibility. They do not want to cause more casualties on their own soldiers and among hostages. So I give a lot of credit to that advice and that counsel that I hear from these Israeli security professionals. I think it's wise counsel. I think they're doing their best under very difficult circumstances to try to advance the goal. They, of course, agree, as virtually all Israelis do, that Hamas cannot be allowed to continue to rule Gaza, and that's a necessary outcome. But in terms of sequence, in terms of methodology, in terms of how to ensure that you have Arab state support, which is available for achieving those goals. This means some political as well as the military ones Israel's engaged in is really something they are trying to leave time and space for.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador. And Congressman Gottheimer, thank you so much for joining us. Prior to you hopping on, our President T. O'Brien.
Oh, sorry I'm late, by the way. Ambassador, sorry I'm late too. Sorry I'm late, everyone. I had to vote. It's this constitutional thing, they make you do it. So I apologize.
No, it's totally fine. We'd love to give you the opportunity to give some opening remarks for folks before we dive into the further Q&A.
Well, I know we're in the middle of the conversation, and I just heard the ambassador, who I'm a big fan of. So I hate to disrupt the cadence here. The only things I'd say is, first of all, thanks DMFI for your work. Thanks to everyone who's supportive. The objectives are unchanged, in my opinion, from where we were months ago, which is, of course, to get the hostages home, including the 48 and the 20 who we believe are alive and hope are alive, get them all home, to crush the terrorists, to ensure that they're not able to continue to not only govern in a way which keeps innocent Palestinians in harm's way, but to allow them to we got to stop them from continuing their terrorist activity, along with the other proxies, And of course, we need to make sure we do everything we can to get humanitarian aid into the region, which I think must remain a clear objective of any effort. I was in Israel about a month ago. It was the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is, as you know, a major artery for humanitarian aid in the southern part. And, I went there with one objective, which was to understand. It was an intelligence committee trip. I was with the chairman of the Intel committee. And the objective was to see the humanitarian aid process. And was aid getting in? What was happening? If you read mainstream media, there's one perception, and what I saw is far different than what is in the average newspaper these days or online. And it's very unfortunate because Western press is not in Gaza, and I strongly encourage the Prime Minister to allow Western press in, because if you see what I saw, you'd realize that the real problem is not whether or not enough aid is moving from Israel into Gaza at the Kerem Shalom crossing or other crossings, but the fact is that the distribution is the problem. And I really think the UN is failing miserably on that front, in my opinion, because they refuse and have refused any kind of protection for their caravans, for their aid caravans. So when the aid moves, and the UN admitted this with their own statistics, that more than 85% of their aid does not get to the intended recipient, is because the aid trucks are quickly attacked, and the aid is taken largely by Hamas and, of course, others who are hungry. But Hamas is taking the aid because they're in the business of reselling the aid to innocent Palestinians. And last year, we know they made $500 million reselling that aid. This part of the story is not actually front and center. GHF, what I saw and met with leadership there is on the operations side of it, and saw the operations. GHF has been much more successful in delivering to people who need the aid, and the UN is failing. And so I think the UN should take, whether that's an international peacekeeping force or any other kind of support they need to protect the aid delivery. In my opinion, that's critically important. And so that's I'll start and stop there, because I know we're in the middle of questions, but that's what I just wanted to make sure. That's what one of the questions you all asked me to address is, what did I learn? And that was, to me, the top thing that I took away from my time there. Obviously, you talk about the Abraham Accords, which I know, Ambassador, you were talking about earlier on this conversation. If the only way we're getting back to that, to your point, is we've got to bring an end to this, and then we have to focus and rebuilding regional cooperation there in the region, which is critically important. So I hope that's enough to just get going, Joel. And again, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was great. One of the things you wrote about in your op-ed, that you alluded to in your opening remarks, was that Hamas owns the blame for the failed distribution to children and families. How can people on this call help to make sure that that truth gets out to more people?
Well, it's very difficult when Al Jazeera is the mouth and Hamas, through their government operations, like the Gaza Health Ministry, or the mouthpieces of what happens, including lying about casualties, intended casualties at GHF sites, and not being truthful about where the aid distribution is going, what their theft of aid, right? I mean, all that stuff is not being reported. I mean, it was barely the visuals of the two hostages a few weeks ago, of the hostages, they were starving. That barely made news, because it's just right now there's a narrative that the press has pushed out that this is all on Israel. This is all Israel's fault, and what I'm suggesting is a different narrative, and it's very hard, especially if the press is not on the ground, to accept something different. And I really believe, the fact is, the UN put out the 85% number. It's not my number. It's the UN's own number, that they have an 85% fail rate. That's insane, right? So who do they blame? And because they refuse to have any kind of protection of their aid with their caravans, because they refuse, to me, they are failing. And that should be part of the narrative out there. But listen, we need to get Western press in there covering this. And because if you see what I saw, I think I'd hope that there's some who would report a different perspective.
Thank you. Ambassador Shapiro, we have a question for you from Harriet S. She asked, Saudi has consistently said that it won't get involved with Gaza 2.0 until the Israeli-Palestinian peace is achieved. Why doesn't Saudi step up now to broker such a peace?
Well, I don't want to speak for the Saudis of why they will or won't. I think the efforts that we undertook during the Biden administration were to try to do the following: work out a series of U.S.-Saudi bilateral agreements that mentioned security, including a security treaty that would have actually gone to the Senate for ratification, economic and energy agreements. Let that be backstop or kind of undergirding for a Saudi-Israeli normalization, during which the Saudis made clear they wanted to see some sign of a direction toward a Palestinian state being achieved in the future. I think there was a lot of flexibility available in terms of what that would look like and the time of when it would take place. But that was what they were seeking. And in that context of putting all of those elements together, I think it's very much reasonable to seek and expect Saudi participation in several things in Gaza, in reconstruction of Gaza. Obviously, they have funds. They have a strong interest, unlike Qatar, which has funded much of the previous reconstruction, in ensuring no funds or no materials get into the hands of extremists, Hamas, or some successor to Hamas or Muslim Brotherhood, who they are strongly postured against in their own society and elsewhere. De-radicalization. They, like the UAE, have done a significant amount of work in their own population to excise extreme anti-Israel, anti-Western, and other forms of biased and bigoted materials from their education system, and really try to advance a more moderate, more tolerant form of Islam and broader education in their societies. And I think there's a lot that they can offer to helping that be the reality in a post-war Gaza and also in the West Bank for Palestinians there too. And even in security, we in our time had not fully engaged them on this question. But if we're talking about a post ceasefire, post hostage return, removal of Hamas scenario, and there's time and space for a multinational Arab force, probably led by Egypt, but with participation by Gulf states, by maybe Morocco, by perhaps Indonesia, and maybe with U.S. support as well from outside. That Saudi Arabia certainly has forces and capability and credibility that they could lend to that effort. So again, a vigorous U.S.-led diplomatic effort should be engaging the Saudis on their willingness to put forward their contributions to what can be achieved. I don't expect them to be the first, and I don't expect them to step forward before there's a real sort of pathway toward ending the war. But you don't have to wait for all of that to happen to have those conversations and to lay out those expectations. It's my impression that when President Trump went to the Gulf in May, he scarcely engaged his hosts in any of the three countries on these issues. There was a lot of talk about business deals. There was some mention in his speech about the Abraham Accords and some future normalization. But to the question, very little serious, detailed discussion by him or by his envoys about what are you, Arab states, putting on the table in terms of what you can do to help ensure that as the war comes to an end, that Hamas is fully removed from power, not able to reconstitute, and that what follows is a more moderate Palestinian society in Gaza and in the West Bank that can be a better platform for peacemaking between Israel and the Palestinians. They all have a role to play, those states, but they won't just step forward and do it. They will do it if the United States is leading that effort and holding them to account to put forward their contribution.
Great. Thank you. As we alluded to earlier, this week marks 5 years since the Abraham Accords were signed, which was one of the most hopeful moments kind of in the Middle East region, and a region where there's often not a ton of great news. Can you talk to us about why the Abraham Accords are so important, Ambassador? And we'll hear from you as well, Congressman.
Well, sure. I mean, they really were one of the major achievements of the Middle East of the last 25 or 30 years. And I mentioned during my earlier remarks, while they took place during the Trump administration, and obviously the President Trump and his team deserve that credit for helping shepherd them. It was something that then candidate Biden embraced immediately, like within an hour or 2 hours of the announcement. One of the few times we had that sort of common and bipartisan agreement during that campaign, and something that was picked up during the Biden administration as a major initiative as well, to expand them, to deepen them, to bring additional countries to those tables, creating other forums like first the Nega Forum and then the IMEC announcement in September of 2023. All of these initiatives promise really bringing the benefits of integration and normalization to the citizens of those countries. It's not just enough to have agreements between leaders and summits between leaders. Those are important, and those set a tone and those set a direction. But these things become meaningful and sustainable if, at the end of the day, a citizen in Morocco, in UAE, in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, and a citizen in Israel, hopefully and elsewhere in Jordan and Palestinian communities in Egypt, also see that the cooperation that emerges in tourism, in energy, in healthcare, and water, and agriculture is something that benefits their lives. And we know, of course, Israeli technology is a big part of this story. Some countries in the region, those that have even not fully normalized with Israel, are taking advantage of Israeli defense technology. Some are looking at Israeli water technology, Israeli ag tech. And it should be something that is brought to the communities themselves. Now, that all has to be folded in and buttressed by education and by coexistence and by helping Israelis and citizens of all of these states meet each other. Of course, we've seen the tremendous flow of traffic, even during the war, between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. There are something like 70 or 80 flights a week between Israel and the UAE, with none of them canceled during the war. Many Israelis going there, not nearly as many Emiratis coming to Israel, but still interchange occurring, business people meeting, tourists and civil society members meeting. And that helps create this sort of web of ties. I mean, really the goal over time, in my mind, should be to stitch all of these different initiatives into an overarching regional organization, which the U.S. is really not the leader of, but a participant or a partner to. And I think, as an example of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, 10 countries in Southeast Asia that have overlapping ties in every one and more of these different domains, and the European Union, which also has multiple very diverse countries cooperating across a whole range of verticals. That is a long way away, but it's something that is built brick by brick. The Abraham Accords, the Nega Forum, the IMEC are all the kind of very strong foundation stones to build from, to attract more countries to it. And when more countries see the benefits that those who are involved in it are experiencing, it makes them want to join that club and makes them want to be a part of it. So we have to get back on that path. We have to get the war over, and then as quickly as possible, return to that pathway.
Thank you.
I'll just the only thing I would add, and I think the ambassador covered most of it. Obviously, as a member of the Abraham Accords caucus, we meet pretty regularly to talk about how do we get this, not just get this back on track longer term after the war, but how are we going to make sure people understand the incredible value of the Abraham Accords, right? I was at the initial signing. I think the ambassador's right. This was a huge bipartisan moment of success for our great country, because I think it's very important that the peace in the region is critically important to us and to our national security to have those countries cooperating. It is a great deterrent to Iran and to terror. And I think, it's critically important. So Iran has had a tough year, but You worry that the government will re-strengthen, and it's very important to us to keep them in check. And I think the Abraham Accords does that by having that regional security cooperation, obviously, and beyond security, technology, and medicine, education, tourism, as the ambassador said. There's so many areas where this relationship, which, at first when I learned of it, I said, no way this could happen, when you look at the history, but actually it's an incredible thing, and we've got to get back on track. I think it's why Hamas and others in Iran were so anxious about the progress being made with the Saudis and the Accords, right? That's part, in my opinion, part of what led to the seventh. And the bottom line is we need to make sure after this is over, because I think it's difficult to do right now, after this is over, that we get everyone back on track, and especially the Saudis, because most will follow their lead. So that's what I think.
Thank you. Turning to some more recent events, Congressman, where do you think we stand on the ceasefire talks post-Israel strike in Doha?
I wish I were in the room. Listen, I think the frustrating part of all these talks is we know the truth, which is that every single time Hamas came up with another reason, another excuse, another subsection that they added at the last minute to every agreement that blew every talk up. And that's just the reality of it. And in fact, in the last round of conversations, my understanding, and this is not classified and this is out there, that they were trying to say that GHF couldn't be part of any agreement, because of course they didn't want GHF part of it, because they can't steal food from GHF and sell it back to the Palestinian people, right? So, I think the very frustrating part of all of these talks to date is that they're not releasing hostages. They're not willing to lay down their arms, as they haven't been willing for 2 years. They haven't been willing to agree, which they have to, that someone else is going to have to govern Gaza, that they are going to have to step aside. And listen, they don't want to stop governing because they don't want to give up power. And so, that makes it very difficult for them in these talks. But the bottom line is we got to do everything we can to get the talks back on track, and do everything we can to get them to agree to those major tenets. They cannot be in charge. They cannot be governing. They have to lay down their weapons, and they have to release the hostages. And they have to stop being part of the machine that starves their own people, that they're supposed to, in theory, be responsible for, which they have failed to be. Let's be honest. They have tunnels under the ground, right there. They're a system that's larger than the subway system in London. Yet, so they could put people underground. They've done nothing to protect anybody throughout this process, because they use innocent Palestinians as human shields and as weapons of their war, their terrorist war that they're fighting. So, I think I'm hoping that doesn't say that we get back on track quickly, that we get back to everyone gets back to the table and keeps working. But it remains to be difficult. It continues to be difficult if they're not actually willing to do what's necessary as basic prerequisites to any kind of negotiation.
Thank you. Ambassador Shapiro, as Congressman Gottheimer was discussing kind of how GHF has changed the game in terms of trying to get aid directly to Palestinian people, about a month ago, Israel started its so-called flood the zone approach. What can you tell us about what food supplies look like in Gaza today?
Well, obviously, Congressman Gottheimer has more on the ground knowledge of that. I haven't been down into that part of Israel during this visit yet, but he was able to see some of the work that's undergoing at Kerem Shalom. That, I think, was a really important shift. As I mentioned in my earlier remarks, I think it was a mistake to pause the international assistance from March to May, and a mistake that President Trump apparently didn't object to. It was not for a kind of an invalid reason to try something different. There's absolutely no doubt that Hamas hijacks, steals, makes use of aid for its own use and for political power. That's been true throughout the war. There's other forms of looting and distribution by people for themselves. And so there's huge problems with that. Again, during the Biden administration, not that we got everything right, but there was a concerted effort by CENTCOM working together with USAID, with the Israeli military, with COGAT, with a number of humanitarian groups to try to secure the routes of distribution of aid. And it wasn't perfect, but it was an ongoing effort, pooling all of the knowledge and resources of all those different groups. To my knowledge, none of that is going on, sponsored by the administration at the moment. So the fact of the aid not being properly dealt with and delivered is a real problem. The effort to try to come up with an alternative of GHF was born of that. It was insufficient initially, and certainly created these dangerous situations of people having to cross long distances and dangerous areas and some shootings to get to the aid. I think once that pressure that resulted from that mistake started to build, as the reports of serious hunger in Gaza emerged and were documented and agreed to, not necessarily famine, but hunger, by even the Israeli authorities, they switched, as you said, Joel, to kind of what I think is the right approach: to flood the zone. The advantage of flooding the zone with as much GHF aid, and that means an additional distribution sites, which is actually a good thing, because then you don't have this problem of people having to cross long distances and overwhelm limited sites, as well as massive international aid and even private sector goods coming in. The advantage of doing that is that it drives down the price of all commodities. That's really what caused the hunger. It wasn't really a lack of food. It was that there were shortages that led to a price spike, something that Hamas was fully taking advantage of. And so that was why that was a kind of an error of approach. The flood the zone drives down the price. It allows people more access to it, but it also minimizes Hamas's ability to weaponize it as a commodity that they use for political control or for revenue. So I think a lot of the international reporting on this from various organizations and from certain media outlets has not caught up with the fact that the situation in mid-September is not at all what it was in late June and early July, when the reports of hunger were coming through. I think much of that has stabilized. It's not perfect. It's not great situation. I'm not saying that, but it's not nearly as dire as it was, and I think that's a good outcome of increasing all vectors of international, of private sector, of GHF aid. And it's going to have to be sustained. But here again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but here again, none of this takes place as effectively as it can without a major U.S. Diplomatic coordinating role. Nobody else has that reach, that credibility, that knowledge, that expertise, from aid to military advice to funding as well. But when we have an administration that dismantles USAID as one of its first acts, when we have an administration that really doesn't give the ability of CENTCOM, which is a great partner to the IDF, an incredible trust. The CENTCOM commander was just here in Israel for a visit with the IDF chief of staff, and the trust between those two organizations is really remarkable. But if the president is not directing CENTCOM to come in and bring that knowledge and that expertise to bear to help Israel solve the problem, then we're leaving assets on the table and not making most use of them. So again, things have stabilized to some degree. There's a lot more that can be done, and the U.S. leadership is really key to making the most of it.
I totally agree with that, and I think it's obviously dismantling USAID. And the constraints he's put on CENTCOM to me make no sense, and it's a missed opportunity, and then you have to build other new things because of that. So I completely agree with that, and I think we need, on the GHF sites, they talk about building up to 16 new sites or 16 total. We need a lot more. There needs to be a lot more sites there. That's the key, right? Because they're traveling long distance. But the big point here is we've got to get the aid out, and also stop doing what's not working, right? Like, we know what the UN is doing is not working, right? I mean, but by their own information, it's not working. So we should either they shift strategy, and I know they don't want to give up. This is just about, I fear parochialism, right? This is just their turf. This is like they don't want to let it go and or do things differently to solve the problem. And I think that's just a huge mistake. And I really hope that they will reconsider it, either partner with IDF or bring in their own military support, their own peacekeepers. They're allowed to do that by their charter. The bottom line is we got to get the food delivered and not allow. And I think you're right, Ambassador. Like, right, the more flood zone we could do, it'll bring the prices down. But in the meantime, as that's happening, we have to do everything we can to stop Hamas from stealing the food and reselling it. Or, as has been reported, I think by BBC, who's no fan of Israel, I think been reported by BBC that some people, Hamas is deciding which house should get food based on if they're tied to Hamas and have the right ties to Hamas, and which home shouldn't get it, because they're in control of the food. They steal it, and they are in control. So, and that story is just missing from the public discourse on this, and I think that's right. And listen, again, I don't think Israel sits up all night worrying about PR, which is part of the challenge here. But this should be something that is out there, and I'm hoping can get resolved.
Well, Congressman, you couldn't have queued me up better. Chaim has a question, which is literally that Israel is losing the world's public opinion battle while winning the military one. Can anything be done about this?
Well, the challenge with that is it's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube. It would have been helpful, in my opinion, to have been effectively getting the facts out there for the last 2 years and more aggressively. Now, I get it. You're focused on waging war and dealing with international criticism, which comes in every day, and it came in on day 3 of this war. Right? No one was very patient, and I think I can't remember exactly. Remember when the hospital bombing was? I think it was within the first week of the war, and we remember that they immediately, and it turned out not to be the hospital, but the garage next to the hospital, parking lot next to the hospital, but they immediately blamed Israel. All the international media blamed Israel for bombing and killing, they said at the time, hundreds of children, I think 500 children. It turned out to be 50, which was far too many, but it was, we believe, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, I think that's been reported, that was responsible. But, there's no forgiveness for Israel. And as things go on, there's less and less around the world, as we see in Europe and other places in the world, which have clearly turned quickly on Israel. And Israel has decided, generally, they may deal with the press within their country, but internationally have not spent a lot of time aggressively pushing back on false narratives and lies. And so that's a huge challenge. Now, you can't just give up and say, forget it. I strongly urge the Prime Minister to invest in public relations and to actually let the Western press into Gaza, because I think they should see it. Now, it's very risky. I get that, but that's and Hamas does not respect war correspondents. They don't let the Red Cross in, right? So they're certainly not respecting war correspondents, and that's a risk. And I get that it's dangerous. But the bottom line is, otherwise, if we don't fix this, Al Jazeera reports, and if you don't put out aggressive corrections, the world believes what Al Jazeera or, frankly, the Gaza Health Ministry or other orifices put out about Israel.
Thank you. To close this out on a positive note, I would love to kind of hear what your hopes are, both of you, for the next 5 years of the Abraham Accords. What do you hope to see out of this continued normalization between Israel and its Arab neighbors? We'll start with you, Ambassador.
Thanks. Well, again, once we're past the war and we're in a situation where Arab partners are helping with a stabilizing and safe reconstruction of Gaza without Hamas in control, hostages returned, obviously, and that we're on that pathway. I think it opens up a very significant opportunity, or resuming those opportunities I mentioned earlier. There are multiple other countries that I think are candidates to be partners to this. Of course, in the Abraham Accord context, there's been discussion already of countries, even some that have normalization with Israel or have long-standing relations with Israel, like Azerbaijan. becoming a partner to that grouping of countries. Saudi Arabia, of course, we would want to see them normalized. They would probably not put it under an Abraham Accords label because they would like it to be their own thing. But they, of course, would bring major legitimacy and major attractiveness to other countries to join as well. There are a number of countries in Africa, Djibouti, the Comoros Islands, Somalia, others that are candidates and have expressed interest in participating in forums like the Negev Forum. Indonesia is a country that has really quite readily expressed interest in deepening its ties with Israel in trade and tourism, possibly even participating in a post-war Gaza security force as a partner, and ultimately normalizing its relations. So, you know, and of course, in that context, you can really see projects, big major projects like the IMEC corridor, getting off the ground with the kind of investment that would be required and construction over many years to really build these networks and these webs that tie these countries and societies together economically, as well as through all the other channels that we're in discussion about. So I see opportunity for that, and to have Israelis and Arabs meeting and doing business together and doing educational activities together, and building companies together and applying technology from one that's developed in one place to another society. I see all those opportunities, but it's not going to happen overnight. There's going to need to be first to get to the end of the war, and then a bit of a recovery period. Obviously, this has been a very a traumatic period for everybody. Israelis are rightfully traumatized by October 7th, and have to be sure that nothing like that can ever happen again. Many Arab societies, having seen pictures of what's happening in Gaza, those that are maybe not well reported like Al Jazeera, but the reality of what is happening in Gaza, which is no picnic, are going to need to digest that and understand that the way you prevent getting back into any cycle like that is precisely through the strengthening of that coalition of moderate countries and societies that want a different future for the Middle East. And by working together, they weaken the extremist actors who are responsible for this war and its prolonging through all these many months. So a 5-year trajectory is a good one to try to, or horizon to try to get back onto that path. It won't happen overnight. Again, U.S. leadership is going to be absolutely key to getting on the road and then making the progress that we'd like to see in those 5 years.
I would just add that what's particularly depressing is that, but for October 7th, I feel like we would be a lot closer right now to what the ambassador was just talking about, right? Those deepened ties, more countries part of the accords, more people building businesses together, more travel between these nations where there was never flights between them, right? I mean, the excitement is there. You've got good Jewish deli being served in Arab countries, right? Like those kind of things are really, to me, exciting. And what's depressing is that we're living in this world right now because of the 7th. And so we have to look forward and be prepared for what's next and be hopeful about what's next. And yes, it may take several years to get there after the war, but we have to make sure we focus. And part of this, to me, is the greatest deterrent to the parent company of terror, to Iran, and to keeping Iran down and in check. And especially if they continue to partner with Russia and China and our other adversaries, right? This is critically important, and a critically important alliance for our country to support. And to me, we should look to it. We should be supportive of it and encourage it. And it means getting past this moment, which is a very difficult one. But we have to be hopeful about the future and focus on what lies ahead. So with that, I'll end on a positive note, if that's okay with everyone. I know it's late where the ambassador is, so we gotta, I've had more coffee.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman.
You'll send me to bed with sweet dreams. Thank you, Congressman.
Thanks, Ambassador.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Ambassador Shapiro. I'm going to turn it back over to DMFI's President and CEO, Brian Romick, to close out the event.
Thank you, Joel. I wanted to thank Congressman Gottheimer and Ambassador Shapiro for their thoughts, insights, and leadership. They each represent the best of the executive and legislative branch of government. There are two things we need your help on. Recently, the Arab League condemned Hamas's October 7th attack and called for Hamas's disarmament and removal from power from Gaza. Representative Auchincloss, Kennedy, Landsman, and Wasserman Schultz are circulating an important letter urging Secretary of State Rubio to seize on the historic diplomatic breakthrough. Please email your representative today and ask them to sign the Auchincloss letter. Scan the QR code on your screen for more information. We also need your help to accomplish DMFI's critical work in strengthening support for Israel and developing more champions like Congressman Gottheimer. Your gift to DMFI helps us educate staff and interns and ensures our ability to get out pro-Israel messaging to deal with the misinformation and hatred that floods Capitol Hill every day. Please go to the QR code on your screen or to our website and make your 2025 gift to DMFI today. Thank you. For those celebrating L'Shana Tova and best wishes for a sweet and peaceful New Year. Thank you.
Thank you, Shana Tova.
So.
Tova.